everyone. My name is Jay Wang. I'm the director of the USC Center on Public Diplomacy. I'd like to welcome you to our CPD conversations. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. For our audience, your setup is in listen-only mode for the duration of the program. Please submit your questions to our speaker by using the question tab in your control panel. And you may do that at any time during the program. And we will address the questions during the Q&A session. And if there are any questions during the program, please feel free to email cpd@usc.edu. Today's topic takes a look at public diplomacy at the state and local level, or what is known as subnational diplomacy. In this increasingly networked and distributed world system, trust between nations may best be built from the ground up at the local level. Therefore, states and cities play a consequential role in building bridges between the United States and other nations, and in sharing with the world facets of American life and our core values. This is perhaps more important than ever during these uncertain and heartbreaking times. So we are very delighted to have a distinguished speaker with us today who will share with us California's efforts and experiences in international affairs. Before we introduce the speakers, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Christina Bellatoni, who will moderate today's program. Christina is a professor at the USC Edinburgh School for Communication and Journalism and the director of the Edinburgh Media Center. Over her 20 years in journalism, Christina has covered local, state, and federal government, along with 4 presidential campaigns and the White House. She has worked as a reporter, editor, behind the camera as a producer, and in front of it as an analyst on national television. She joined USC after serving as a member of the masthead at the Los Angeles Times. So Christina, welcome to CPD, and thank you for joining us. I now turn the program over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that warm welcome, and greetings, everyone. It's kind of neat to be on something other than Zoom, which I've gotten very familiar with over the last few months. I'm sure some of you have as well. So interesting to not see everybody's faces, but I'm really excited to welcome you to today's conversation with California Lieutenant Governor Eleni Kounalakis. We're really lucky to be joined by her right now. This is an incredibly busy time, an incredibly stressful time for everyone, but also for the state of California in particular. And so I think we're going to have a really robust discussion. And before we get started, I wanted to go over a few items just so you know how to participate in the event. Again, submit the text questions by typing your questions into the pane of the control panel, and we will get to those after our conversation and some of the Lieutenant Governor's remarks. So without further ado, I'll tell you a little bit more about the Lieutenant Governor. She was sworn in as California's 50th Lieutenant Governor and the first female to ever be elected to the position in January 2019. And from 2010 to 2013, Eleni Kounalakis served as President Barack Obama's ambassador to the Republic of Hungary. She was the first Greek-American woman, and at age 43, one of America's youngest, in fact, to serve as a U.S. ambassador. She is the author of Madam Ambassador, 3 Years of Diplomacy, Dinner Parties, and Democracy in Budapest, which chronicles the onset of Hungary's democratic backsliding. Governor Jerry Brown appointed her as chairwoman of the California Advisory Council for International Trade and Investment in 2014. She also was a virtual fellow at the Department of State, Bureau of Intelligence and Research between 2014 and 2017, and is currently a director of the Association of American Ambassadors and the National Democratic Institute Ambassador Circle Advisor, in addition to serving on so many boards and commissions as Lieutenant Governor and working with Governor Gavin Newsom to keep California strong. And she has done many, many things prior to her public service. She was president of the housing development firm AKT Development, working there for 18 years, building master planned communities and delivering quality housing to Sacramento region's working families. Lots more to say, but I will add that she graduated from Dartmouth College and earned her master's in business administration from UC Berkeley's Haas School of Business. Go Bears. And she holds an honorary doctorate of laws from the American College of Greece. Thank you so much for joining us. Really nice to get to see you on a screen, and we're looking forward to hearing your remarks this morning.
Well, thank you very much, Christina. It is wonderful to be here with all of you. I'm a big fan of USC, even though I did go to Cal, and the Center for Public Diplomacy does such incredibly important work in this area of subnational diplomacy. So it is really an honor to be with all of you. Director Wong, it's great to see you again. And Christina, it's great to be here with you, and I look forward to the Q&A that we're going to do. So I thought I would just start by going through and talking a little bit about how California sees its role in the world stage right now and how that's evolved somewhat over the course of the last year and a half. As you mentioned, Christina, I'm a former United States ambassador, and so it has been a transition for me personally to go from representing the United States as a senior government official to representing the people of California. But in a way, it's been a fortuitous coincidence, because I believe that there is no more important time than now for California to elevate its voice on the world stage. And that really starts with the direction that the federal government has taken foreign policy. As we know, there has been a substantial turning inward by this administration. The America First type of leadership is quite different than since the Second World War, the United States building alliances in the world and taking on the role as the leader of the free world. So many of the important international agreements that the United States led on, this administration has pulled away, including the Paris Accords agreements, the agreement with Iran, the building of engagement with Cuba, and has led us down a very different path. And so, so we have had this moment in our state where we've recognized that there are things that California can do during this time when there's been such a shift in American foreign policy. So I do think it's important, though, to underscore for all of you that I certainly, and my team, knows the difference between leadership at the sovereign national level and leadership at the subnational level. And for us, it isn't about subverting the will or the direction of the United States of America. It's about looking for those opportunities where it is appropriate for California to be able to assert our interests and values in the world, again, without finding ourselves in conflict, direct conflict necessarily with the federal government. And frankly, we've found lots of opportunities where we can do that, and hopefully do it in a way that will urge more engagement in the traditional values of the United States. So I'll get into that a little bit more. But just to start with where California finds ourselves in this conversation. We are, or have been up until going into the COVID crisis, the 5th largest economy in the world. We are one of the world's great innovation and cultural centers. And in many ways, California is where the future begins, with technology, with green economy, with agriculture, education, entertainment, manufacturing. The governor frequently calls us a nation state, and certainly underscoring that this is not a sovereign country, but at the same time, the magnitude, the size, and the influence of California is very clear. We have a population of 40 million people. We're diverse, incredible resources, and of course, the California dream is something that people know about in the world. The governor likes to note that without disparaging other states, you don't hear about the Ohio dream or the Florida dream. You hear about the American dream and the California dream. And again, this gives us a special platform to engage in the world because of who we are. So when the governor and I both took our oaths of office back in January of 2019, and we quickly realized that we had an opportunity here, and he tapped me to be his representative for international affairs, and we got to work. So very quickly, we established 3 primary pillars of California's efforts around foreign relations. One is trade, the second is immigration, and the third is climate change. So in the area of trade and commerce, a couple of points about California's profile in the world, again, pre-COVID statistics. So our two-way trade in 2019 totaled nearly $600 billion. We are one, depending on the metrics, or the leading state in the country for attracting foreign direct investment. Trade and FDI supports over 5 million jobs, or has, again, going into COVID, supported 5 million jobs, which is about 1 in every 5 California jobs being connected some way with international trade and investment. And they tend to be good jobs, which pay an average of about 30% more than the average wage in our state. I should also note, and I come from a California farming family myself, that we produce some of the most important crops in the world, and about 200,000 jobs in California are attributed to agriculture, of which 70% of those are in rural parts of the state. Again, very important. As I'm sure you all know, there are great disparities from one part of the state to the other in terms of economic prosperity and job creation. And so any part of our economic sector that brings jobs to rural parts of the state are especially important to us. So that's kind of the framework around trade and commerce. And again, as is well noted, we do not set trade policy for the country. We have been navigating the very troubled waters around the tariffs dispute with China, and major impacts have come our way even before COVID of the trade disputes. But that doesn't mean that we can't use our tremendous influence and relationships to help support increasing trade between California and our foreign partners. So secondly, I want to talk about immigration. Here again, California does not set immigration policy. I wish we did. If we did, it would be quite different than what is happening at the federal level. But again, here, we know that our engagement is very important. So the profile of California when it comes to immigration is pretty striking. 27% of Californians are foreign born. At least one, for 50% of us, we have one of our 2 parents who are foreign born. 44% of Californians speak a language other than English. And we have the most H-1B visas in the United States here in California, about 180,000 people who are here on H-1B visas. So I think that when it comes again to the question of California's bully pulpit, we have inherited the mantra that belonged to the United States, which is we are a nation of immigrants. As you know, the federal government took that off of many of the federal websites and is not trumpeting that as an asset internationally for our country. Here in California, we can continue to loudly trumpet the fact that we are a state of immigrants and that we directly connect this to not just the cultural richness of our state, not just the innovation of the state, but really broadly to the economic success of the state of California. And that's important for us to talk about it on a very technical level. For the first time last year, the governor allocated state resources to help support asylum seekers who found themselves on the California side of the border without the kind of federal reentry support programs that had existed in the past. So finally, I want to talk about climate change. And I think that of the 3 pillars of California's foreign relations, the ability to engage on the issue of climate change is the one where we have the most latitude. So California leads on green technology and green finance. We lead in our very ambitious climate goals. Our 2045 goals of being carbon neutral are extremely aggressive. And we are pioneers in zero emission vehicles because, of course, in order to meet our 2045 goals, with so many cars on the road in California, we have to do quite a bit to transfer and transition into more ZEVs. So this again is an area where we can lead in a way that makes a difference. So California and several other states in the country declared early on that even though the Trump administration intends to lead the United States out of Paris, California is staying in. And when early on in 2019, just a few months after taking office, I think two months after taking office, I was invited, the governor was invited, of course he could not attend, but we were separately invited, but I went to China for the Belt and Road Initiative, obviously quite controversial for the country. And again, not my intention to subvert federal foreign policy, but rather to talk about what California is doing in the area of climate change. So the only issue that I brought with me to China, to Belt and Road, was how incredibly important it is for China in their efforts to be a global leader, to understand and to recognize that putting climate at the top of the agenda in all of their Belt and Road projects was very important. So we made that case. I'm sure everyone is thinking, well, wait a second, they're not doing a very good job at that in terms of their Belt and Road projects outside of China. It's true. But every time we have an opportunity to take the stage and to advocate for foreign countries taking climate change seriously, we do it. And that was probably the best example of being able to send that message on the world stage. I also think in the area of climate change, it's important in this grand topic of subnational diplomacy to talk about the Under 2 Coalition. The Under 2 Coalition started out as the Under 2 MOU. It was signed in 2015 in Sacramento and it was an initiative that started between the state of California and the state of Baden-Württemberg in Germany. Since then, the Under 2 Coalition has become one of the most important subnational agreements in the world. There are 220 jurisdictions that have signed on, and it's been an incredible tool. In fact, I had the opportunity to go to India and speak at the Racina Dialogues just a few months ago. And even though the government of India, for instance, is not part of the Paris Accords, there are subnational governments within India which are moving in that direction and signed on to the Under 2 coalition. So I think that's an important data point as well. So now I thought I would just talk a little more specifically about how California is engaging in organizing ourselves at the government level to do so, and what's different about past models. So back before 2003, California had a Department of Commerce for a variety of reasons, including a report that came out and went to the California legislature. The Department of Commerce was done away with, along with over a dozen trade offices which existed around the world and which were part of California's footprint. So these were paid for by taxpayer dollars, and there were offices around the world promoting trade with California. So that was a substantial change in 2003 when that went away. I had the opportunity in the late 90s to serve on the state commission that oversaw those offices. And like anything, I think efficacy or need for those kinds of things waxes and wanes. And at that critical moment where their efficacy or the need for them may not have appeared to be so important, those programs were done away with. Between 2003 and 15 years later, approximately, when Governor Newsom and I both took office, engagement did not go away, even though the Department of Commerce did. What ended up happening is you saw various parts of the administrative offices internalize their international engagement and act autonomously and in a way that was not particularly well coordinated. So you might see the Air Resources Board signing MOUs. You might see the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development signing MOUs, the EPA signing MOUs. All this engagement was going on, but it was not perhaps as coordinated as it might have been. Governor Brown recognized in his efforts, his extraordinary efforts to raise the profile and the voice of California on the world stage around climate, that more coordination was important. So he started to build bridges between the various agencies around climate. And then he also, within GoBiz, created a special commission for trade and foreign direct investment, which again, I found myself in the middle of that. He asked me to chair it. But again, these were efforts that, while extremely edifying for myself and my chief of staff, who was the director of GoBiz at the time, still seemed to lack what I would describe as the highest level of state government committing to an organized approach. And Governor Newsom really has shown that kind of vision and leadership. Again, I think probably because of the sea change in leadership at the federal level around the issues that are important to California, both in terms of our interests and our values. So what did we do? So we worked with the governor and his legal team to draft an executive order, which the governor signed just a few weeks after being in office. And what this executive order did was it created an interagency committee, which I chair, and it has the governor's heads of his agencies and secretaries which engage in any kind of foreign or international work. So EPA, CARB, GoBiz, the Office of Emergency Services, STA, Visit California, and others. And that is our forum. So we meet quarterly in a public meeting. This is an opportunity whenever we meet for these agency heads and secretaries to present not just to me as the governor's representative for international affairs, not just to each other in order to have a higher level of understanding of what the administration is doing in this space, but also to the public, because these meetings are open to the public. And all of these three pieces put pressure on the administration to work in a more coordinated way. We also needed to add to the expertise of the state government in order to be able to maximize our efficacy. So I recommended to the governor that rather than staffing up in the office of the lieutenant governor around international affairs, which by definition then would not necessarily be permanent, because who knows down the road who holds these positions, whether or not they would want to continue with the relationship. I recommended that the best place to house this team would be over in the governor's Office of Business and Economic Development. So we now have an international affairs advisor there. We have 3 trade representatives, which are organized geographically. They are new. This is in lieu of having trade offices in the world, and the whole profile of that we can get into later, but that's changed quite a bit. What we decided is we should have our trade reps in Sacramento, but with a travel budget to be able to go to countries that are in their portfolio to be able to advocate for trade. And then what we also started doing is establishing trade desks in these foreign countries where our trade officers would be able to work from, again, and having a presence from which to use that as a platform for enhanced partnership. What we also recognized is that my job as lieutenant governor does not lend itself to traveling more than, I think, in a targeted way. So we looked at how we could best use any travel any types of missions that I would participate in, to do it in a really targeted way. So as I mentioned, my first international trip was to China for Belt and Road. I also had the opportunity to go to Armenia. You know, we have a very important Armenian community in California. And then the third really significant trip that we took was to Mexico. I led a delegation to Mexico for about 5 days, and the mission was to reestablish and reaffirm California's commitment to partnership with Mexico, which is our most important foreign partner. Then we also, and then of course I also had led a mission to India, which was really incredible, and we packed so much into that trip around trade and travel and tourism and agriculture, and really had made some good progress with our relationship with India. And again, all of these things in Q&A, I'm happy to go into more details. And then we also double down on our relationship with the California Consular Corps. So outside of New York, there are more foreign diplomats in California than anywhere else. And so, for instance, during the COVID crisis, I've had 2 rounds of calls with consular officers, consul generals here in California. and have had opportunities to engage, whether it was with Italy in the early days and understanding what was happening there so that we could prepare a response here, or our engagement with China as we were battling for PPE. Those relationships and bolstering those relationships, it's already been quite productive. And through those relationships, we've also rolled out the red carpet for visitors. So we have had the Taoiseach, the Prime Minister from Ireland. We've had the President of Italy, the Prime Minister of Armenia, high-level groups from the Netherlands, Jiangsu, Australia, and on and on. Again, to bolster those relationships in order to advance our 3 pillars that I mentioned at the beginning of this. And then I also will just say that even though tourism is not we have in California an incredible organization called Visit California. And if you haven't heard of it, I encourage you to look it up. Visit California has been around now for quite some time. It is industry funded to the tune of about $130 million a year. And they promote tourism in the world. They have offices in the world promoting tourism to our state, supporting about $144 billion in revenues to the state of California through tourism. And that is extremely important. So Carolyn Bettetta, who runs Visit California, is a very close partner of our effort. And we work with her very closely to help support her work. So I think maybe I should wrap it up. But I do want to recognize that we are in a period of time unlike anything we've ever seen. And we're already at work trying to understand what this economic downturn, where are the edges of it, how deep, how wide, what is the recovery going to look like, but also what can we be doing to prepare for economic recovery around international trade and investment. And I think that I'll just end by saying that the profile of our state that has made us the 5th largest economy in the world and given us the profile and the bully pulpit that we have really haven't changed. We still have an extraordinary world-leading system of public higher education that leads to a skilled workforce. We are the largest consumer market in the United States. That has not changed. We are a state which embodies the spirit of innovation, of risk-taking and dream-making, the Silicon Valley ecosystem, Hollywood, green technology, all of that is still here. California supports more startups, and we deploy more venture capital funding than anywhere else. Half of the venture capital in the United States is here in California. And then again, the profile of our state as the best place in the country for immigrants who are seeking the California dream, that has not changed either. So with that, I will wrap it up and turn it back to you, Christina, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Lieutenant Governor. Not only did I learn a lot from hearing that, but it makes me very encouraged about the state of our state right now, to know that there's so much work going on so many important fronts. And I like these 3 priorities very much. Makes me heartened for my children growing up in California. So I thought I would touch on something that you addressed, and one of our audience questioners sort of addressed it as well, and the idea of sort of being in other places physically to promote trade. You talked about, establishing this travel budget for different people, different portfolios, and the trade desks. And, I'm wondering how difficult that has been in this COVID era, and then just your sort of speculation a little bit, like, are we becoming a less global society after facing a global pandemic?
Well, it is an interesting time, and we've seen this massive transition in communications. I mean, just look at how we're engaged right now. It might have been that I would have flown down to Los Angeles and been in the room with you and others, and then there would have been a component, maybe you would have live streamed it and others would have watched from home. But this transition has been so fast and dramatic. I think that we all have to be thinking about communications through this new lens. Literally, we've had our first opportunity to engage in a virtual trade show. It's on the books. It's being planned right now. We'll see how that goes, but our team is working hard to make the most of that opportunity. Will there be, so you asked specifically, is globalization decreasing? No. Globalization, my view is that it will continue to grow in prominence in how we engage in the world, and certainly for California. But will we physically need to be in foreign countries in order to be able to engage on the global stage? Probably not. You know, the Rasina dialogues in India were incredible. People from all around the world, people who perhaps are willing to go to a conference in India, but may not be interested in going to a conference in Washington. You know, brought a slightly different profile. It was really quite an incredible thing, but it required me to fly for 18 hours to get to India and to be wide awake in the middle of the night. Now, being wide awake in the middle of the night might be necessary for a Zoom conference, but it is really interesting to think that a lot of the Rasina dialogues or other international conferences could be done effectively online as we make our way through COVID. We probably will all be gathering back in person again. I think that there is no substitute, because the things that happen on the margins of conferences or trade shows is so incredibly important. But I think what we're going to see is an increased number of people who engage online. So we may see a net increase in international engagement because of this transition to more online work.
That would be a good silver lining, I think. So I wanted to ask about climate change. You mentioned the 2045 goals and how aggressive they are. And obviously this has been an area where California has been a leader for many years and no more than at this moment. But I wonder, and kind of combining this with a question that came from the audience already, how are we doing at this moment now toward those goals? And then, realistically, how much can we do from California when the United States government has relinquished its opportunity to do something at this moment?
Well, I think that one of the challenges is this this idea, which has not been borne out by the example of California, that you can't have economic growth and protect the environment at the same time. You can. California's economy has grown, our population has grown, and our emissions have been dramatically reduced over the last 15, 20 years. So we are the shining example for the fact that you can grow your economy and protect the environment. So we have to continue now to make the case that we can recover and have a strong economic recovery and not abandon our commitment to combating climate change. We're certainly going to continue to double down on this in California, but as other countries or states maybe change their focus, it really is up to us to say, clean technology creates good paying jobs. Advances in battery technology can have massively beneficial business models for those who venture in it. Carbon capture, which is going to be an important piece of combating climate change also creates incredible opportunities for small and medium-sized and large businesses as well. So I think that number one, California has to continue to trumpet this from our bully pulpit. Secondly, we have to continue to invest through our cap and trade program, which is, and other programs that we have, all of which are going to take financial hits with the changes that the state budget will have, but that I think everybody's budget is going to have. But what I think is special about this moment is that with so much of a reduction in emissions because people have not been on the roads for the last 3 months, we have something to look at as a vision of the future. As the stay-at-home order is lifted and more cars are on the road and more activity in our economy is producing more traffic, which equals more emissions. We have this data point, this experience that all of us in the state can point to of what it was like to work from home, of what it was like to be out of your car and not, commuting long distances. I think that this is now going to be a touchstone for what we will, as we reopen the economy, be able to get back to in terms of carbon emissions reductions.
Yeah, that is a hopeful thought. I like that. I want to, you've touched a little bit about the budget and sort of the difficult economic realities facing, the state government, facing people personally, the entire globe is in a tough situation right now. And I wonder, as these discussions are happening in Sacramento, what sort of realities should Californians be preparing for right now?
So right now, for the month of April, we had a 15.5% unemployment rate. May, when those numbers come in, will probably be higher. We're looking at the possibility of up to a 25% unemployment rate, which would be unprecedented. The height of the recession in California, we had about a 12% unemployment rate. So this is uncharted territories. The number of people who have filed for unemployment insurance in the state, also unprecedented, about 5 million people. And that is at the same time that the Paycheck Protection Plan, the PPP plan, many of you might be familiar with or maybe even participated in, which was part of the HEROES Act, the CARES Act, that reduced effectively unemployment because it encouraged employers to keep people on their rolls by accessing these grants. So these numbers are really staggering. And right now we are anticipating a $54 billion budget deficit. Now, going into this crisis, California has had a very, very strong financial position. Last year, the governor increased the amount of reserves in our rainy day fund. Very helpful to have $16 billion in reserves. Over the course of the next 3 budget cycles, last year, this year, and next year, we will probably have to access the entire amount. But better to have it than not to have had it. That's an important cushion. We also have been able to access other resources, being able to borrow from pots of money that are in the purview of California to be able to do that. There are several examples of that. And then, of course, and this is really where it becomes critical, is we have had quite a bit of support from the federal government through the CARES Act, substantial amounts of federal money coming to help support programs that were essential in combating the crisis, but also in helping to fill the gap. We have, the governor has joined a coalition of other Western states governors in asking for additional funding. About $14 billion is the request for the state of California. And in this category, what the governor did in his budget revise for the May revise is say, okay, here is a bucket of things that if we don't have federal money, we're going to have to cut. These are called the trigger cuts. They're devastating. They include cuts to education, include cuts to higher education, includes cuts in healthcare and other important safety net services. And so we are lobbying very strongly, and we are very hopeful with Nancy Pelosi's leadership that we will be able to fill the budget gap with some additional federal funding. But everyone should be watching, because if the federal funding comes through, that is going to be an enormous help, an enormous cushion for us as we combat this unprecedented shutdown of the 5th largest economy in the world. If those funds don't come through, we are going to see and feel the pain of that.
Yeah. This kind of ties into my next question. California, I grew up in San Jose myself. I've loved always, as California goes, so goes the nation. That's something that I think there's a lot of pride in, that we're such a leader. But as we have seen, and in particular in the years since President Trump has taken office, it also makes California a target. And both a political target, but then an actual logistical, does the request get granted when you've got such conflict and ongoing lawsuits on many of these priorities that you've outlined? Our own climate policies have been challenged, our immigration policies have been challenged. So how does California kind of navigate that, this nation state idea, when you also are in a direct conflict with the federal government?
Well, thank you for that question. I think it's a very important one. I think everyone has been watching the governor's daily press conferences, and he decided very early on that if he goes to war with the Trump administration, that will not be in the best interest of the people who he serves. And as you can imagine, there, I'm sure, have been moments where he felt he needed to, hold back. But the reality is that states have got to work. We have to work with the federal government. And at a time like this, where we didn't know if we would have enough ventilators for a period of time, we didn't know if we would have enough hospital beds. And the federal government has the ability to fill that need for our people. It was not a time to play politics. And that has been important from the beginning. And I think that the governor will likely continue on that path. I was even concerned as I opened my remarks talking about the importance of California's voice in the world stage with the foreign policy of the Trump administration. As someone who served as a U.S. ambassador, I'm extremely concerned about the direction that Donald Trump has been taking the country. And we have to be open. We have to talk about, speak truth about what those policies have meant for our country. But I try to stay factual because, again, having served at the federal level, we are all Americans. And there has never been a more important time for us to bond together and to work together and to see how important it is for us to work together toward our combined interests and the interests of the people who we serve.
Yeah. And I should point out, and probably everybody on this call knows, you are a Democrat. You have endorsed recently former Vice President Joe Biden for his presidential campaign, just in full disclosure on that. There are so many good questions that are coming in from the audience, but it would be derelict of me as a journalist, a journalism professor, not to talk about this moment in our country. And the question I had prepared, of course, is better asked by our former dean, Ernie Wilson, who sent in question just, beautifully asked. So I'm going to ask his question in lieu of mine on this topic. So at a moment of such volatility in U.S. society, what impact will these demonstrations have on the United States long term, and also on public diplomacy in general? Is there something California can do to enhance the national image and California's own standing?
Well, Ernie, thank you so much. It's great to see you. I'm so happy to know you're out there. I think the moment right now calls for grieving. Someone asked me yesterday, what is the message of hope? That'll come, but in this moment right now, we have to grieve. We all saw that video. I don't know that that image of George Floyd calling for his mother will ever leave my mind. And we have to allow for time to feel the emotion that that video brought up. An incident that happened after a string, what feels like a string of never-ending incidents of police brutality against African Americans. So I think that's the first thing we really have to do, is let people get it out. Now, in terms of the non-peaceful protests you've seen across the state, curfews, we cannot allow for the destruction of personal property. That is not the answer. So we have to manage through this process as best as we can without creating more circumstances of violence. I think that the curfews have actually been quite effective in that. Unfortunate though as it is, I mean, first we have stay at home, now we have curfews, all unprecedented. And then I think that what we have to double down on in Sacramento is the fact that we are aware of income inequality. We are aware of the issues that we face in this state around access to higher education. We are aware of the kinds of embedded racism that is the legacy of slavery in the United States. And that's the first step, is being aware. And from that, transitioning into policy to address it, yeah. California has been forward leaning on this. After a terrible incident a year and a half ago in Sacramento of police brutality against an African-American man, the state did take action and has now a law in place that limits the use of force. And it's working so far in our state. So we are a place where, frankly, this is a state where primarily we have Democratic leadership. We have a majority in the Senate, a majority in the Assembly. All of our statewide elected officials are Democrats. As a result, what you have is, instead of this partisan fighting and the kind of partisanship that we see in Washington that makes it so hard for people to get things done, in California, we have a lot of like-minded people. Now, that doesn't mean there isn't plural thinking. There is plenty of plural thinking in California's democracy. But we have a process of looking and debating the best solutions for addressing the challenge that most of us see pretty clearly. And there is very little disagreement on that piece, which allows us to advocate for policies that will deal head on with issues of racism and discrimination, as well as the challenges that we have around equity.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So we have so many good questions. There's two, I know in the interest of time, we're not going to be able to get to all these. One great one about the relationship with the Philippines, one about our relationship with Mexico, but I'm going to go to this question as our final question from a public diplomacy alum. what are the major diplomacy questions that you would love some extra help thinking on? Or where do you feel there needs to be more research? What areas?
I think that strengthening, this is a really great question, and I appreciate it. And whoever asked it, if you have ideas, please reach out to me directly. But one thing that we learned through COVID is the opportunity to engage not just subnational to federal, but subnational to subnational. So I've had regular phone calls with Governor Bonilla, the governor of Baja. We were working very closely during the PPE frenzy. We were working very closely with the two subnational governments in China, Jiangsu and Guangdong, that we have sister state relationships with. They were helping us vet factories that we were looking at engaging in contracts with over PPE. So I think it would be really interesting to go further into this area and understand further what kinds of agreements, what kinds of non-treaty MOUs we actually have the authority to enter into to ramp up our engagement, again, from one subnational level to another. But again, if there are things, if they think, oh, she didn't answer, there are other things that she should be looking at research, please reach out to us. This initiative that Governor Newsom and I and our teams have embarked upon is new territory, and we are very open, very interested in input from experts. My senior advisor on international affairs is a 27-year veteran of the State Department, so we're really enjoying the process of looking for new areas to engage and to use our subnational authority to do so and to create partnerships. So input, welcome.
That's great. And, we love our Center for Public Diplomacy and all that it does. That's really important thinking down here for everyone. So, thank you so much for taking the time today. I am sure, given all of the, you must have so many Zoom meetings. I think I have Zoom fatigue. I can't even imagine with all of the different organizations that you are part of and commissions that you serve on and meetings you must have. So we're grateful that you would share this hour with us and help us learn more about this. So thank you so much, Lieutenant Governor Eleni Kounalakis. Thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. If you have other questions, please contact cpd@usc.edu. And then also, just so you know, after this ends today, you will receive a survey on our presentation. So please make sure to give some feedback. And you will also get a link to a recording of this webinar that you can share. So on behalf of CPD, all of us, thank you so much for joining us today, and hope you have a great rest of your day, all of you.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you, everyone.